Miles Davis is widely regarded as the most significant catalyst for the stylistic evolution of jazz music in the 20th century, a figure whose career was defined by a relentless revolutionary spirit and a refusal to remain stagnant. Unlike many of his contemporaries who mastered a single idiom, Davis functioned as a Picasso of jazz, constantly dismantling established structures to forge new genres. His approach to genre blending was not merely additive. It was a radical synthesis of disparate musical languages, ranging from the formal architecture of European classical music to the visceral, electric grooves of funk, rock, and soul. By integrating electronic instruments, studio editing techniques, and non-Western scales, Davis effectively bridged the gap between the high art tradition of jazz and the burgeoning counterculture of the late 1960s and 1970s. Davis's first major foray into genre blending occurred in the late 1940s through his collaboration with arranger Gil Evans and composer Gunther Schuller. This period marked a departure from the unfettered frenetic energy of bebop toward a more restrained, orchestral sound that would eventually be termed cool jazz. The landmark 1949 to 1950 sessions, later compiled as Birth of the Cool, utilized a nonette that included instruments rarely found in jazz at the time, such as the French horn and tuba. This project was a foundational element of the third stream movement, a term coined by Schuller to describe a musical synthesis that merged the improvisational heart of jazz with the compositional techniques and tonal palettes of Western classical music. Davis viewed the ensemble as a choir, seeking to make the instruments sound like human voices, thereby elevating jazz from the nightclub to the concert hall. In the late 1950s, Davis revolutionized the internal logic of jazz by moving away from complex, rapid chord changes toward modal jazz. This shift, most famously realized in the 1959 album Kind of Blue, allowed musicians to improvise over simplified scales, modes, rather than a rigid sequence of harmonies. This innovation drew heavily from Davis's interest in impressionistic classical composers and his desire for spontaneity in the playing. By utilizing a palette of space, Davis created a meditative, lyrical atmosphere that transcended traditional genre boundaries, making Kind of Blue the best-selling jazz album in history and a touchstone for musicians across all disciplines. By the mid-1960s, Davis became increasingly influenced by the electric sounds of rock, funk, and soul, specifically the work of James Brown, Jimi Hendrix, and Sly and the Family Stone. His marriage to songwriter Betty Mabry further exposed him to the psychedelic rock scene, prompting him to incorporate electric keyboards, bass, and guitars into his ensemble. This transition began with albums like Miles in the Sky and Fears to Kilimanjaro, but reached its full flowering with the 1969 release of In a Silent Way. In a Silent Way is often cited as the first true fusion recording, utilizing a proto-ambient approach that blended minimalist improvisation with electronic textures. Davis and producer Teo Macero employed revolutionary studio editing, treating the recording tape as a flexible medium to be cut and spliced, a technique more common in avant-garde classical and pop production than in jazz. This was followed by the 1970 double album Bitches Brew, which shook jazz out of its commercial doldrums. Bitches Brew combined the spontaneity of jazz with the raw power of rock and the hypnotic, ostinato beats of funk. The album featured a massive lineup of musicians, many of whom, such as Chick Corea, John McLaughlin, and Joe Zawinul, would go on to lead their own influential fusion bands like Return to Forever and Weather Report. In the early 1970s, Davis pushed the boundaries of genre even further with a tribute to Jack Johnson and On the Corner. On the Corner, 1972, was a particularly radical experiment, aiming to capture the essence of urban life by blending funk-infused bass lines with Eastern percussion and world music motifs. Davis sought to reach a younger, black audience by emphasizing the ground beat and dense, layered rhythms over traditional melodic development. During this electric period, Davis often used an Echoplex unit on his trumpet, further blurring the line between acoustic performance and electronic manipulation. After a 5-year hiatus in the late 1970s, Davis returned to the scene in the 1980s with a focus on contemporary pop and funk. He famously reinterpreted hits like Michael Jackson's Human Nature and Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time, applying his signature modal touch and eloquent phrasing to modern melodies. His 1986 album Tutu, a collaboration with Marcus Miller, utilized synthesizers and programmed drums, proving that Davis remained at the forefront of technological and stylistic shifts until his death in 1991. Throughout these 5 decades, Davis's genius lay in his ability to identify raw talent and create a context where musicians from diverse backgrounds, classical, R&B, rock, and even hip-hop, could converge to redefine the musical landscape. Thanks for watching.